Let's take a look at number 53 from section 9.1. We want to take this graph and use it to find out what happens to each of the points we're asked to transform based upon the fact that we want to transform f of x, y equal f of x, into y equal -2 f of x plus 1 plus 1. So I want to talk briefly about, and we want to start with the point -2, 2. And we want to see what's happening to every point on this graph. And I'm trying to use a color-coded system here, hoping that this will help. So this is the point we're starting with. Well, this negative, which I have in red, is a reflection about the x-axis. So the effect that has is just the negative. So the effect that has is every y is multiplied by -1 when you reflect about the x-axis. So this becomes -2, comma, -1 times the original y. So -1 times 2. So -2, -2. If all I do is deal with the reflection about the x-axis, which is signified only by the minus sign, then this 2, which is blue, is actually a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. So I'm going to deal with that by multiplying my y coordinate by a +2. So the point now, after the reflection about the x-axis, becomes, notice the x is unchanged, and the -2 is multiplied by 2. So I now have a -4 for my y value, based upon the vertical stretch. Now the green, the +1, is a horizontal shift 1 unit to the left. So I obtain that by adding a 1, subtracting a 1, since it's a shift to the left, I'm subtracting a 1 from my x value. So when I shift this point 1 unit left, -2 minus 1, which is -3, becomes my x. Y remains unchanged when all I'm doing is a horizontal shift. One way, if that's confusing, why is this a plus and we shift it to the left? One way you can think about this is, what value would you have to assign x so that this parenthesized expression became 0? And notice x would be a -1 in order for x plus 1 to equal 0. So it's -1. Whatever x value makes this parenthesized expression 0, that's the x that I add to the x of the point that I'm shifting horizontally. And now I'm going to deal with the last issue, and that's this pink +1, which is a vertical shift. And when I perform a vertical shift, only y changes. So I'm vertically shifting this point, -3, -4. And I do that by adding a 1 to my y value of the point that I'm shifting. So -4 plus 1 is -3. So the point -2, 2 transforms into the point -3, negative 3. So let's go to my math lab and let's actually put that value into the problem. And let's check it. Okay. All right, now I want to find the transformation of the point negative 1, negative 1. And we're going to go back to the problem, and to the paper where we're writing, and we're going to do this again. And the point was negative 1, negative 1. Yes, that's the point that's on f of x, and we want to perform these transformations on that point. So when I reflect about the x-axis, I multiply y coordinate by negative 1. So that becomes the point negative 1, 1, when all I do is reflect it about the x-axis. Now I want to do the vertical stretch. So the y value is multiplied by 2, which is this blue 2 up here. So this becomes the point negative 1, 2, when I do both the reflection and the vertical stretch. Now I want to employ the horizontal shift, so I am moving 1 unit to the left, so I subtract 1 from whatever my x value is for a horizontal shift. So negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. My y is unchanged. And then to do a vertical shift 1 unit up, I add 1 to the y value of this point. So the final point that takes into account every piece of the transformation is the point negative 2, 3. All right, let's see what happens to the point 0, 0. So the reflection about the x-axis requires that I multiply the y value of the point I'm reflecting times negative 1. So this becomes 0, 0, because negative 1 times 0 is still 0. The vertical stretch multiplies the y-coordinate by the factor of the vertical stretch, which in this case is that blue 2 up there. 0 times 2 is still 0. Now let's do the horizontal shift. We want to move this green 1 unit left, so we add a negative 1 to our x that we're shifting horizontally. So this becomes negative 1, 0. And then let's do the vertical shift by moving this 1 point up, which means we're adding 1 to our y. So this final point gives me the results of the full transformation. Reflection about the x-axis, that's this negative minus sign. Vertical stretch is the blue 2. Horizontal shift is the fact that I'm adding 1 to the input of the function. And the vertical shift of 1 unit up comes from the fact that I'm adding 1 to the entire expression. All right, so negative 1, 1 is what we wind up with. Let's put this into my math lab. right, so let's check our answer on that one. All right, so now let's transform the point 1, negative 3. Reflection about the x-axis means multiply your y-coordinate by negative 1. So I now get the point 1, 3. So that's the result if all I did was reflect 1, negative 3 about the x-axis. Now the vertical stretch, which is by a factor of 2, requires that I multiply every y-coordinate that's being transformed by 2. So notice we work with the negative sign and the 2 separately. All right, so this becomes a 0.16. And now I want to do the horizontal shift by subtracting 1 from this point. And that gives me the 0.06. And now let's do the vertical shift, which means we are moving 1 unit up in this case. We're going to add 1 to our y value. And our final point here is the 0.07. So that's how I would perform the transformations on that point. Oops. All right, and just that quick, 0.07. All right, so let's check this answer. All right, and it looks like we want to also transform the point 2, negative 2. So we're transforming these 5 points that are here. So the point 2, negative 2. Fraction about the x-axis, multiply your y-coordinate by negative 1. So then this original point becomes 0.22. Stretch it vertically by multiplying your y-coordinate by 2. And this becomes 2, 4. And so notice this blue 2 is what's causing the vertical stretch. Now let's horizontally shift by 1 unit. So I'm going to add a negative 1 to my x-coordinate. 2 minus 1 becomes 1. And the y value in this case stays the same. Now let's do the vertical shift where we are vertically shifting 1 unit up. We're going to add 1 to the y-coordinate of this point to get the point that is affected or is the transformation based upon the function y equal negative 2 f of x plus 1 plus 1. So the point 2, negative 2 transforms into the 0.15. And let's type that in. And let's check our answer. So that's how I would do that. So I'm asked then to graph this. So in other words, basically the problem walked me through taking these 5 points that you see here, highlighted on the graph, and it walked me through finding the transformation of each of these points. So all I need to do then is plot those points. So I need a graph. Let's pull our work up here. That has these 5 points on it. All right, so let's look at the options. So I needed to have the point -3, 3. I needed to have the point -2, 3. The point -1, 1. So that's not on A. That could possibly be here. I have the point -3, -3. Let's make that a little bigger. So here's my point -3, -3. Here's my point -2, 3. Right there. Here's my point -1, 1. Here's my point 0, 7. And then here's my point 1, 5. So this is actually the correct answer. And that was B.